Hello, this is Faith at Faith&books. I'm going to do a quick tag. I saw this at Book Time with Elvis a little while back. When did he put this up? Yeah, it was April 3rd. And that's a new channel I'm really, really enjoying. So if you haven't checked out Book Time with Elvis, highly recommend him. But this was a tag that originated with Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. And it is called A Sense of Place, My Neck of the Woods tag. So it's only got 2 prompts really, and then it asks you, number 3 is to tag 3 people. But the first prompt is, tell us what you are defining as your neck of the woods. So I live in Northern Virginia in the DC metropolitan area. But I'm going to define it more than just the immediate, around the Beltway area. Because, I've lived here almost all my life, and there are other parts nearby that sort of influence my life and influence this area. So I'm going to extend it. So it's Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, Loudoun County, and maybe even all the way out to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, which is just about a little over an hour away from here. Then I'm going to go north up to Baltimore, or if I go west up to Gettysburg, both of those are just a little over an hour away. If I go through DC and towards Annapolis, Maryland, that's a little over an hour away also. And then if I go south into Virginia, Richmond, Virginia is 2 hours away, in the capital of the state. So I'm going to include a lot of Virginia and then kind of the Maryland area. And I kind of rushed through this. I thought about this like last week, and then I never got around to doing it. So I think I sort of had to revise on the fly. So I'm actually trying to get this done before Kate Howe's Victorian read-along social, which I think is starting at 3. I hope I'm right. Anyway, okay, so that's what I'm defining as my area. So I live just an easy drive to Mount Vernon. If I, maybe 2 hours to University of Virginia and Monticello, that's my area, plus Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. I lived in Baltimore for 3 years. That's where my husband's from. So, all right, so the second prompt is, tell us about 5 books or authors that you think are important to your neck of the woods. These could be people originally from your area, books set in your particular area, etc. All right, I have so many authors that I could mention, and I'm just gonna mention some, but I'll try to stick to the 5. I don't have books for all 5. Well, maybe I do, but a couple of them, well, at least one I haven't read. But I just have heard about it, and it's been sitting on my shelf, and I just have never gotten around to it. But the first book that I don't have with me, but that I really liked, and I think is a really interesting representation of the area that I'm talking about, is the nonfiction book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It was by, what was the author's name? Rebecca Slutz or something like that. And it was a bestseller, so you probably remember it. It was about the genetic research done on this woman's, she had, unfortunately, cervical cancer, and they took her cells for research. And she grew up in rural Virginia. She was African American and grew up in rural Virginia outside of Roanoke, which is one of the bigger. Virginia doesn't have really big towns, or cities, but Roanoke is one of the bigger ones in the mountains. And she grew up there, in Confederate loving Virginia, and then she wound up going to Johns Hopkins University for her health care and for the research in Baltimore. So the area, the story really involves lots of areas that I'm familiar with or have driven through or can imagine because I've seen similar places in Virginia. And so it had that, it sort of resonated with me not only because it's actually a really fascinating book, but also because it just sort of, resounded with areas that I'm familiar with. So that would be the first one. And I don't have a copy of it. I couldn't find a copy to show. I don't know. I might have given it away. The second author is more Baltimore, and that is Ann Tyler. And the book I really wanted to showcase is The Accidental Tourist, because that's really set in two different distinct areas of Baltimore. So I forget what the second one, well, it wasn't Federal Hill. What was the area? It was more of a townhouse, blue-collar area. That was where I don't know, I can't remember anybody's names in the book, but if you remember the movie, they made a movie. I think it was Gina Davis's character. But it also, it starts off in the Roland Park area, which is sort of the old wealth WASP, very settled wealth area, old brick houses with manicured lawns, and it's very, very proper. And it starts off in that neighborhood, and then it sort of contrasts. And if you know Baltimore, you get that contrast when you see, how the main character's marriage dissolves, but then his wife wants to get back together. But in the meantime, he's taken up with this other woman from this other area of Baltimore that's very different. And so it sort of the areas sort of reflected the personalities of the two women. So, but Ann Tyler, a lot of her books are set in Baltimore. I can't remember if this one actually was. This is the last one that I've read. If not in Baltimore, she might not state things straight out that's where it is, but it has the Baltimore feels to it. So Ann Tyler would be an author that would be known for evoking the place, this general area, my neck of the woods. Another one that's also the Virginia Maryland connection would be this guy, Edgar Allan Poe. So he didn't he go to the University of Virginia? Yeah, I think he did. I don't think he graduated though. So I think they honor him down there. But I went to law school in Baltimore, University of Maryland at Baltimore. And it's right next to the church where Poe is buried. And every Halloween, they have these spooky tours you go through. And some unknown invisible person always puts a rose. I think it's a rose, and maybe a bottle of whiskey. I can't remember now what they put on his grave every Halloween. But Edgar Allan Poe, and I think he died on the streets of Baltimore, didn't he? So he's also sort of the Virginia, Maryland connection. So he's a big one for this area. Oops. Another, let's see, so that was 1, 2, 3. Actually, I have 6 out here. Well, I'll show the one that I haven't actually read. This is a classic children's one, and this is set, I think, in sort of some sort of suburban housing development, or I don't know, it was a suburban area, kind of quasi-rural, just a little bit south of where I live. And this has just become a children's classic, Bridge to Terabithia, by Katherine Patterson, and that's also set in Virginia. So that's another biggie. And then this guy taught at George Mason University, but apparently he had a brother, Robert Bausch, who also did. I don't understand. I was researching this and I got the two confused because I'd only read Richard Bausch. And this is a book I own. I've read a couple of books by him. I was really into him back in the day. There he is, himself. And he taught at George Mason University, which is where my youngest son is currently going to school. He's studying music education. I really enjoyed his books. Now, he's not that well known, except maybe around here, but apparently he had a brother who was more well known that I didn't know about. Another author, also from George Mason, is Susan Shreve. She wrote a little blurb. I I read some of her stuff too. I had a friend who was getting a master's in linguistics from George Mason, and she would drag me to these things to do with authors and the English department at George Mason. And so that's how I found out about him. But I enjoyed him, provocative, and it's too bad more people don't know about Richard Bausch. And I'm going to have to check out his brother, Robert Bausch, because somehow they both worked at George Mason. They both were writers. So anyway, so he's another one that I would say is kind of representing this area because he's right in my area of the world. And then this is one I haven't read. It's been sitting on my bookshelf for a couple of years now. I'm afraid to read it because I think it's going to be really depressing. But it's also set in Virginia, and it's The Glass Castle by Jeannette Walls. I got to read this at some point, just so because I hear people talk about it. Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, it looks really interesting. I should really read it. So those were some of the books that are kind of from my area or might evoke elements of the area that I live in. This Northern Virginia, D.C., up into Maryland, down into, further down into Virginia, like Richmond or even Williamsburg. So I thought I would talk about some more authors that are associated with Virginia. One that I thought of, that I hadn't thought of for so long, and I read her book, I think that won some award, either the Pulitzer or what did she win? But it was Ellen Glasgow, and she's from the Richmond area of Virginia, and I think she won for her book Barren Ground, which I actually read that in my woman authors class in college. And now that I've thought of her, I really think I need to seek out her books and read them because I remember being very impressed by Barren Ground. And I remember being bleak. The title kind of says it, but I don't remember anything about it. But Ellen Glasgow is a famous woman writer from Virginia. Another famous woman writer who was born here, but she's more famous for being out west, is Willa Cather. She was born in Winchester, which is where my sister lives. And there's actually, as you go into Winchester, there is a road called Cather Lane, and I always wonder if it's related to Willa Cather, to her family. I think she moved out to Nebraska like when she was 3, but she was born here in Virginia. Another famous woman writer who's popular today is Barbara Kingsolver, and she lives down more in Southern Virginia. Her husband's a professor at what's the name of that? Can't remember the name of the university down there, but she lived down there, and I remember reading her Animal Vegetable Miracle, which I really enjoyed that book. But that's sort of evocative of just how fertile, how the fecundity of Virginia, and it's really good farmland here. And so Barbara Kingsolver would also be Virginia. Booker T. Washington came, even though he wound up in Alabama, he actually was from Virginia. He went to school in Hampton University, and you can visit his birthplace in Virginia. It's up near Smith Mountain Lake, I think, up in that area. So he's another one. William Styron, who wrote Sophie's Choice and the book about Nat Turner. He wrote other stuff too. I once met that friend that I was telling you about that was getting the master's in linguistics and would drag me to events in the English department. We once went to a panel of authors. I remember it was Nadine Gordimer, which, I mean, she's from South Africa. She's famous, I think, most famous for her short stories, but I think she also wrote novels, mostly about apartheid. She was there, so that was amazing. Then there was, for some reason, the guy who wrote The Joy of Gay Sex was up there. It's kind of on a whole different level. But then there was William Styron. I'm pretty sure it was William Styron, or was that a different event? Anyway, I had seen the movie Sophie's Choice, and I had read the book. utterly devastating, just so depressing. And so I was interested in seeing him, and he was terrible. He came off as just a nasty person. He was drunk, and he was just so pompous. Oh, he was just cringeworthy. And I was so disgusted. And then later on, I found out that he went into rehab and he had depression or whatever. But my goodness, he's certainly real turn off. But anyway, he's from Virginia. Then right now, and I've never read a book he wrote, and he actually lives like right in my area. For all I know, I've bumped into him in the grocery store or whatever. But it's David Balducci. He writes bestsellers. I don't know. They're kind of like, I don't know, CIA thriller type things. I don't even know what he writes. But I know that he's really popular, writes popular fiction that a lot of people enjoy. Another one that evokes Virginia is Earl Hamner, who, started the Waltons TV series. But what was the name of it? It's called, their last name wasn't Walton. It was now it's escaping me. But anyway, you can actually go, this is outside of Charlottesville, you can actually go to the original home that the Waltons were based on. It's a really charming little tour of the house and learning about the whole Hamner's family, growing up kind of on the edge of Appalachia and being poor in rural Virginia. What's the name of that? Something's Mountain. Spencer's Mountain. Spencer's Mountain, yeah. They made a really bad movie with Henry Fonda, and it was set out west instead of in Virginia. But, Earl Hamner is another one. And then the Misty of Chincoteague, that is in, let's say Chincoteague is in Maryland, but then the horses swim across to Assateague, which is in Virginia. I think I have that right. I've only ever driven through. I've never seen the ponies swim. When I was a little girl and we'd go to the beach, sometimes we'd drive around if it was a rainy day. And I remember driving through Chincoteague after the ponies had swam, and being very disappointed that we didn't get to see it. But yeah, so those books are set in Virginia, Maryland area. The Felicity books, which started the whole American Girl series for little kids, they were set in Williamsburg. So that's really interesting, very evocative. And we, when my oldest daughter, who's now 30, was like 9, and she was really into Felicity, we actually went to Williamsburg and did a afternoon tea, Felicity's afternoon tea. We learned how they served tea. We learned how they danced. We sewed a little sampler. They had a whole thing based on Felicity. It was really fun. Yeah, that was good. And then the last one that I'm going to name, did I write anything else down here? No. Last one I'm going to name, I've said before, it's Frederick Douglass, and he, of course, lived in Washington, D.C., and he came from the eastern shore of Maryland. And the last thing I'm going to say is one of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movies is Marnie, because it's set in the horse country of Loudoun County, in a really quaint little town called Middleburg, and then it's also set in the harbor, the poor harbor area of Baltimore. And I love that movie because it evokes these two places that I really am familiar with. Even though he did it like on a set or whatever, it's not really, but he got a feel for it. And so I really love the movie Marnie from Hitchcock, even though it has some questionable stuff going on there in that movie. If you're familiar with it, you probably know what I mean. So that's it. That is my, I have to tag people. Oh, goodness. Let's see. Who shall I tag? Well, oh, gosh. Okay, I'm just going to say, because I think that my social with Kate Howe already started, and I'm late. So I'm just going to tag anybody who wants to do it, and I will post this. I will post the 3 prompts at the bottom. Or in the description box. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm really rattled. So I will talk to you later. Hope you're doing well, and happy reading. Bye.